Okay, let's talk about activity-based costing. Not a particularly easy concept. So we're going to go over this. It might take a couple videos. The whole point of activity-based costing is to figure out what your overhead is. So let's talk about what that even means. So when you're making stuff in the manufacturing process, there are three different kinds of costs that you're going to have. You're going to have direct labor, you're going to have direct materials, and you're going to have what's called manufacturing overhead. Direct materials, very easy to trace when you're going through the manufacturing process. Direct materials, direct labor are both easy to trace as you're going through the manufacturing process. So direct labor would be somebody actually on the assembly line putting stuff together, would be an example. Direct materials would be the larger materials that you're using to put stuff together. So if you're making a bicycle, the handlebars, the seat, the spokes, stuff like that. Everything else is sort of put into what's called manufacturing overhead. And that's this catch-all account that has a cost to it to make your stuff, but it's not necessarily easy to trace to a particular item that you're making. And so what companies do is they have to figure out how best to estimate the cost of this overhead per item. And activity-based costing is one of the ways that they can do that. So we're going to go over an example right now. So this corporation uses activity-based costing. The point of activity-based costing is to find what's called a cost driver. A cost driver is that item that makes your cost go up. So in this case, for assembly, their cost driver is machine hours. So they're not going to have really much overhead or much cost if they're not running their machine in the assembly process. For processing orders, their cost driver is the number of orders. They're not going to really have any overhead cost if they're not processing any orders. And then the last one is for inspections, and the cost driver in this case is inspection hours. Again, they're not going to have that cost if they don't have any inspection hours. So what we have done to best estimate our costs, and again, this is just an estimate, it's not an exact science, they're just trying to best figure out how they can accurately allocate their overhead costs that aren't easy to trace to their products. So for assembly, what they have said is they have $1,005,040 in overhead cost. Well, we know that we're going to estimate 68,000 machine hours. So when we do the math on that, we are figuring that each machine hour is going to cost in overhead $14.78. Sorry, that is my annoying dog. Hold on. So in overhead, $14.78. Again, this is just the overhead, the stuff that's not super easy to keep track of. So I'm going to write down $14.78 per machine hour here. And that is for the assembly cost. I'll put my calculator over here. So assembly. For processing orders, they've estimated 102,500, and also they expect about 2,000 hours. So their cost for processing is going to be about $51.25. And then finally for inspections, they anticipate 139,840 in overhead, and they also anticipate 1,900 in inspection hours. So that's going to be $73.60. So the question, now that we have our overhead costs, now we can predict what the total cost of the 450 units is going to be. So for 450 units, they're going to require 710 machine hours. Well, we know what our cost per machine hour is, so let's just calculate that now. So 710, and we calculated it at $14.78. So, oops, I did not do that right. I'm sorry. So 710 times 14.78. So $10,493.80. We are also anticipating 42 orders. So we know what our order cost is. So 42 times that 51.25. So 2152.50. And then finally, we know what our inspection hours are going to be. We anticipate 12 of those. So 12 times what we calculated, 73.60. So 883. So all these together is going to be just our overhead cost. So again, that's 10,493.8 plus 2152.50 plus 883.20. So our just our overhead is $13,529.50. Well, again, we still have direct materials and direct labor. So it tells us direct materials is 3642 per unit, and we are making 450 units. Yep. And actually, I think we just want a per unit cost, so we don't need to even calculate that. So let's take our total cost. I'm sorry, I was going to think total cost instead of per unit. So our overhead was 13,529.50. And per unit, if we divide by 450 we're making, that's 3006. We're also going to add our 3642 and our 3016 for labor. So this is our cost per unit.